Emily, welcome. Thank you so much for joining the summit today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
It is a pleasure because today we're going to talk about something that is very special and very close to a lot of people, and that is special education. Before we jump right into that, can you tell us what special education is and how it applies to the vast majority of, sorry, the vast families across the world?
Well, special education essentially refers to individuals who are neurodiverse, meaning their brain functions a little bit differently, they learn differently, they often have challenges or diagnoses like a learning disability, ADHD, autism, a speech and language challenge, where again, their brain functions differently and they need to be taught in different ways. And it affects at least 20% of the population, if not even more than that. So I would say probably every single one of us knows someone, somehow, some way, who falls into that special education category.
With the number being at 20% of families across the country, what are some of the impacts to the families as well as maybe the children that they experience?
Well, I would say that many children who, again, fall into that special education category, they often really struggle in school. So that's something that of course, profoundly affects families. They might struggle with one skill, like reading, or they might struggle with a combination of skills, reading, writing, math. Sometimes they struggle to stay focused. They have very poor organizational skills, executive functioning skills. So these are all challenges that can profoundly affect families if they're not addressed appropriately. And that's why I'm such a believer that the more proactive families can be, the earlier they can address these challenges, the better it is both for the child and for the entire family.
And then what are some of the steps that the parents can take to provide support as well as identify children that are neurodivergent?
Well, I'm a big believer that a parent will always be a child's best advocate. So if a parent is noticing challenges at home, whether it's struggling to learn how to read, struggling with their homework, a child is very disorganized, the first thing I usually recommend is talk to the child's teacher. See if the teacher is noticing those kinds of challenges as well in the classroom. If they are, it might make sense to have an evaluation done to determine if anything is going on a deeper level. And that can be done free of charge through the child's school district. If in fact there is a learning disability, ADHD, something of the like, then typically the child will receive either a 504 plan or an IEP, where they will then receive services and accommodations within the school day to really help them thrive and to meet their own potential.
And when it comes to identifying the needs of the child and the supports required or maybe even necessary, what are some of the obstacles that maybe parents and or families face in both of these scenarios?
That's a great question. So, well, step one, of course, is having the evaluation done so that we know what, if anything, is going on with the child, and therefore what are the services that they need. Sometimes obstacles that parents run into is that the services the child needs may not be offered in their school. So, for example, if a child has dyslexia and they need reading tutoring using a method called the Orton-Gillingham method, well, there might not be a teacher who's trained in that method who can help the child in school. And so those are some obstacles that families sometimes run into. And that's when outside support can really be helpful. I know it may not always be accessible to every family, but anything that a parent can do to make sure that their child is receiving the services that they need is just so important for the family and for the child.
Perfect. Because I know a few people, as I shared, that they have children that are on the spectrum when it comes to ADHD, and two of them has Asperger's. I believe that's what it's called, right? And they had to navigate the system. And one of the challenges they found was one, coming to terms with the type of support that they're going to have to provide, and two, understanding that even though they're going they're experiencing this with their child, it doesn't mean their child is any less than another child. And that takes me to my next question, which is what are some of the myths that you see when it comes to children who need special education, who have special needs that you want to clarify and or debunk at this point?
Sure. Well, I think one of the greatest myths is that individuals with special education needs are not smart. And I think for so many years, kids who had a learning disability, who were on the spectrum, for lack of a better word, they felt that they were stupid or incapable. And that's completely not the case. In fact, I've met with so many students who have a learning disability, who have ADHD, who are brilliant and have very high IQs, very high potential, but they just need the right support and the right services to help them meet that potential. So I think that's probably the biggest myth that I've seen. Some of these kids are brilliant. They almost all have gifts and strengths, and it's a matter of building those areas of weakness while continuing to play up the areas of strength.
And if the parents are unable to find, let's say, resources in their school, what are some of the alternative options that they may have to still assist their child and support their child?
Sure, there are some organizations that offer free support, like the International Dyslexia Association in New York. In New York, there's Everyone Reads. And then if a parent is able to fund outside tutoring and pay for the right services for their child, of course, that can be helpful as well. And again, I know not every family is able to do that, but if a family can allocate resources, knowing that they're doing what's absolutely best for their child, they're giving them what they need, they're building their potential, they're building their growth, their self-esteem, then I believe those are resources worth channeling towards what can really help their child.
For the parents out there, Emily, who has children in this way that maybe sometimes they think to themselves, what did I do to cause my child to be this way? What advice would you give to them knowing to help them not feel guilt or shame because their child may be viewed differently by others and or society?
Well, first off, it has nothing to do with the parent whatsoever. Children are born this way. Their brains develop differently. It has nothing to do with anything the parent did. What I will say where the parent comes in is early identification and early action. And I know that many parents who I've spoken to have broken down in tears because they feel that they waited too long to get the right support for their child. They waited until their child was in fourth, fifth, sixth grade and had to then work backwards and felt that sense of guilt for not taking action earlier. So that is the one thing I think is so important for parents to do. Don't hide under the sand. Don't feel like there's a negative stigma. Take action, have your child evaluated, and give them the support they need as early as possible.
Based on your experiences, is that difficult for the parents to understand that it's not their fault and to then continue forward under that thought process?
Some parents initially they feel some sense of guilt or some sense of a responsibility, but once they understand that their child was born this way, that it was absolutely nothing they did and nothing to do with the food they gave them or the amount of sleep they had them that they gave them or anything like that. Once they accept that and realize that they had nothing to do with that, then most parents realize that now what they just need to do is take action, identify the challenges, and take steps to address and give the child the right supports.
And we're speaking about the parent and the child, and then there's of course the maybe extended family. When it comes to children who require this type of support, what are some of the impacts that it may or may not have on the extended family members?
Well, I think that sometimes it can feel like a challenge or a burden for parents and extended family to have this child that requires so much extra support beyond what other families may need. And I think that can feel difficult, it can feel frustrating. But again, it's no different than someone who has a medical diagnosis and needs medical treatment. You just sort of accept the situation, do the best you can, take action, and help them in any way that you can. And yes, it can feel like a burden, a challenge, but again, it's no different than other challenges that we all may face down the road with our extended family.
I believe that is key. And I know, as I shared, I know a few people that have children this way, and I've spoke to a number of people, yourself included. And one thing I've always highlighted, and to remind them that your child, like everyone else's child, is different. It could be different color hair, different color eyes, different color nose, different color feet. We're all different and unique in our own way. And I think if we start looking at it that way, instead of maybe feeling that, oh my goodness, I can't take my child to family functions, which I know some parents have shared with me that they've experienced because they feel isolated and family members don't want to maybe be around that situation. I think that would help. And you shared that there's support for the children and it comes to the parents and providing support for them. Is there then also support for the parents who maybe need assistance with their emotions and with their thoughts and with their mental health and their well-being?
Sure, there are a lot of support groups, community organizations, also on social media. There's a ton of Facebook groups on every different kind of special education need and parents of kids who have those kinds of special education needs. So I do think it's great for parents to connect with other parents who have kids like their own so they can share their stories, share ideas, share strategies. And that's a great way to help parents feel better about what they're going through, knowing that so many others are going through the same thing.
How important to the parent, especially if they're new to, let's say I'm a new parent and it's been identified that my child is going to need supports in this way. How important is the community aspect to that new parent who's embarking on this new journey?
I think it's important. I think working as a team in general is very important, meaning within school, oftentimes a child will have several different providers working them. There might be their teacher, maybe there's a speech therapist, a tutor, an occupational therapist. And I think the more everybody can work as a team, the better. And that also applies outside of school. I think the more support a parent can feel that they have, the easier it'll be on them and the better they can support their own child.
And then they won't feel any guilt, any shame, right? Because you have someone who has been through it building you up, saying that, Emily, you got this, Terrain, you can do this,
Yes.
right? And it reminds me of just parenting in general, how sometimes you'd go to your grandmother, your aunt, your whomever, and then they'll say that this is what I know, and this is what I wish I knew at that time, right? Do you see that as well, where when the community comes together, you have parents sharing best practices and how vital is that best practice, especially when it comes to, I wish I knew this 5 years ago?
Sure, I think it's very vital. I think that parents have sort of gone through this journey, many of them alone, and learned through practice and experience what worked, what didn't work. So when they can share what worked with the community and with other parents going through that, it's such valuable information for other parents. With that said, of course, every child is different, and a strategy that may work for one child, even if they have the same diagnosis, may not work for another child. So sometimes there may be a little bit of trial and error in that sense. But I do think absolutely parents sharing their stories and sharing the success of their kids who are neurodivergent with strategies that work for them is completely invaluable.
So, Emily, as we close, I'm going to give you three wishes. And these are three things you can wish people knew. Okay. So, when it comes to special education, what are three things you wish people knew and why?
One is that, as I alluded to earlier, some of the most brilliant, incredibly smart individuals are neurodivergent, some of the greatest leaders and CEOs of our country. So there's absolutely hope for your child and the world, I should say, not just our country. There's so much potential, there's so much hope. And also that everyone has strengths and weaknesses. We're all unique. And even though a child might struggle significantly with reading, maybe they have dyslexia, they might be an incredible artist, or they might be great at theater or drama. So it's so important that a parent doesn't just focus on the negatives or the challenges, but really tries to emphasize the positives and the gifts, because that is what keeps a child's self-esteem going and keeps their confidence strong. And, I think the third piece is just uh, advocacy is so important. Just continuing, parents should always advocate for their child, even if something is going well, they're having a great year or a great marking period, that could change very quickly. So parents should always be on top of what's going on, how their child's doing, and continue to do that throughout the journey of their child's education.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Emily. Your insight, experiences, and wisdom is so valuable. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.